Welcome back to Spotlight. It is my pleasure to be here with Egyptologist Ashra Kwesi again. Good to see you, my brother.
Yes, sir. Honored to be here.
Yeah, man.
On Spotlight again.
Yes, yes. Got a lot of snow in Texas.
Well, we don't have snow, but
cold.
it has ice.
Ice.
The ice is up. You got that warm climate coming from the south and the cold from the north, and bam, we get the ice.
So I know you're having a good time in the BVI.
Hey, brother, my wife told me there's ice going on right now, so, actually we were supposed to be here in December. And we iced up and couldn't make it, and she said, it's good that you got out when you did because it's ice right now. So.
Yeah. Well, February is African Descendant Story Month, because I don't like to say black, and, and right. If you say African,
right. We're evolving.
People think of
somewhere else. We're all the same people.
So when you say descendants, I think
right.
it brings it a little more diasporic. If
Exactly.
I want to create a new word.
Exactly. Well, diaspora, we are in diaspora. We were taken from Africa. Let's keep the story real. And we were brought here to the islands and to America. So diaspora would be proper.
Yeah.
All over the world.
So I want to round off the month. We just beginning March now. Round out the month with you, and happy you were able to be here. And of course, we want to thank Brother Joseph for bringing you. You're here for this Saturday. When
this Saturday will be at the Mellow Moods Cafe, right, at 8 o'clock, and that'll be March 5th. Oh, I'm sorry. Tomorrow. Tomorrow.
It's not
tomorrow.
Saturday. Okay.
Yeah, I'm locked into
the weekend thing.
The weekend thing in the States. I'm sorry. Yeah, it's tomorrow at 8 o'clock.
Oh, okay.
Tomorrow, yes.
Wednesday.
March 5th. Tomorrow's March 5th? Yeah, let me look at my watch. Yeah.
We get all confused.
Yeah. When you're traveling, I've been traveling. Actually, I was in Uganda last month, so I haven't caught up with myself since.
Yeah.
Traveling a lot in Ethiopia prior to that.
It's all my fault. I should have known. So it's tomorrow. Tomorrow.
Yes, sir.
March 8th at Mellow Moods Cafe, and that's at 8 p.m.
March 5th.
Yeah, March 5th.
Yes, sir.
It's March 5th. I don't know what's going on. It's March 5th, which is tomorrow, Wednesday, at 8 p.m. And I'm reading your paper, and
right.
I'm seeing the 8th, and so I'm getting confused.
That is 5.
Yeah, it's March 5th, and it's a free will offering of $10.
Yes, sir.
As the preachers like to say. A free will offering of $10.
Okay.
And we're going to be talking about the African origin of Christianity.
Yes, sir.
The African origin of Christianity. And I was thinking about that this afternoon. And I was saying to myself, that could be a misunderstood statement from the perspective that during that time, there was no Christianity. There was no Jesus. There was no religion, Islam, and those other religions. And so it dawned on me that you must be talking about the principles that has been inculcated into the religion of Christianity, originated in Egypt. Would that be an accurate statement?
Yes, somewhat. Yes, I think we have to follow the historical chronology.
Yes.
Of how Christianity and Judaism and even Islam and other religions evolved. And I refer to the fallopian tube of our mother, but I'm talking about the mother Africa. They are all historical evidence, scientific evidence, anthropological evidence that validated that African people were the first people. So for many years now, 34 years of my life, I have returned back to Africa and given respect to my teacher named Dr. Yusuf Binyakinen, and 14 years doing field research with him. After hearing him lecture on this topic in regards to the African origin of civilization, religion, and asking him back in 1973, can you prove what you're saying here today? Of course, I'd never heard this. It was not taught in the schools. And he said, yes, I can take you back and show you. I can prove this. But above all, we need young people like you to do field research. So that's how I started my journey, and never knowing it'd take 34 years. So there on the temples and tombs and monuments that have been there for 2 and 3 and 4,000 years, we can see that many invasions that came into Africa, whether we look at the Greco-Roman period, and many of these ideas were literally plagiarized or copied directly from the temples. And if we look at, let's look at where did the earliest Bibles, if we want to start with that, where was it written at? Like the Septuagint version of the Bible. Okay,
the what?
The Septuagint version.
Septuagint.
The Septuagint version of the Bible. Where was it written at? It was written, this is the Greek's first Bible, by the way, okay? It was written in Egypt, Alexandria, Egypt. So why does Alexandria, Egypt play such a major role? Is there we can see the development of the Bible during the time of the Ptolemies, who at that time were on the throne of Egypt, who usurped the throne of Egypt. There we see that
who are not really Egyptians.
Who are not really Egyptians. We're talking
invaders.
Invaders. We're talking about Alexander II. Okay, in many cases in the classroom we're taught to call Alexander the Great. When he first came in, this is where Egypt was introduced to the West. Even though it was introduced prior to that, and Greek philosophers like Thales, Pythagoras, and Socrates, and all these other Greek philosophers got many of their ideas, okay, that we see in Greek philosophy in the Western world today from ancient Egypt. So after Alexander, came in as a conqueror, and after his death, the Ptolemies took over, and this is where many of the temples were plundered. Okay, we're talking about temples that are still there, like Ipit-Asut called Karnak today. Also Enit, Neter, okay, of Dendera, Temple of Heru. These are places that are not mystical or used to be. They're there. And from many of the scrolls and papyruses that were taken from these temples and housed in the Alexandria Library. And from these ancient spiritual scrolls, papyruses, okay, in fact, where the name paper gets its name, from papyrus. So these spiritual writings were written on papyrus before it was written in paper, as we know as the Bibles today. So African people wrote these spiritual stories thousands of years ago. Many spiritual ideas that we see and we practice, okay, in terms of in Christianity, in terms of what the Christ means, and how in ancient the Kemetic teachings. And by the way, I use the Kemetic teachings and not Egyptian teachings, because that's Egyptian is a Greek word. Kemetic is referring to the black people, African people of the Nile Valley, who actually created this spiritual idea of the resurrection of a spiritual Christ, okay, that represents a spirit within ourselves. This is how the Western world came in contact with these early spiritual teachings. Without it, we would not have Christianity. Many ideas that we see in Judaism, like, for instance, the laws of Ma'at, truth, justice, and righteousness. I have not robbed, I have not stolen. This is how equally the laws of that we know in the tabernacles or the Ten Commandments, okay, came from the laws of Ma'at. Okay, they're on the temples, they're on the tombs, and so forth. Unfortunately, we don't have.
So I want to go so fast.
Okay.
So you're saying that the commandments in the Old Testament, what we know as the Old Testament,
What we know is the Old Testament.
and you have about 600.
Moral
You have
ethical
about
codes.
you have about 613 of those commandments.
Well, actually, it's known as the Ten Commandments.
But it's known as the Ten Commandments,
Right,
and they've taken out 10 of the
Of the
many,
original 147 laws of Ma'at. Right.
Okay, so you're saying that those commandments came out of
with early Kemetic Africans of the Nile Valley had established these moral ethical codes, okay, to govern one's moral life by on earth. I have not robbed, I have not stolen, I have not prolonged the offering. Thus we get, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not rob, thou shalt, and so forth. And then one may say, well, these codes equally exist in Babylonia with Hammurabi. Well, equally the moral ethical codes of Ma'at also predates Hammurabi. So the story starts in the Nile Valley, not in Mesopotamia, not on the banks of the Tigris-Euphrates, okay, but in the Nile Valley.
So Hammurabi it's conceivable then that Hammurabi got those codes from ancient Egypt.
Well, European biblical scholars a lot of times will bring up a Hammurabi, to try to justify the fact that these codes existed. But when we talk about the chronology of these moral ethical codes, they equally predate Hammurabi as well in Babylonia as well.
So, sometimes when I read the Bible from a genetic perspective, because I think there are many ways to approach reading the Bible or any religious book.
Exactly right.
But from a genetic perspective, I get the feeling, and I want to be corrected on this. I get the feeling that Africans wrote the Bible about Africans for Africans.
Well, of course, because that's who was there, Africans, right? Writing for African, writing for
and the majority and the vast majority of the people spoken about and the activities taken by these people in this what we call the Bible are African people.
Or African people of the Nile Valley. And this is the reason why when we speak of Egypt, as it's called today, as our ancestors called it, Kemet, ancient Kemet, that literally means black, okay, where in fact the term chemistry equally came from. We look and see that this is where we can find many of these spiritual stories, but Egypt has been locked away. Most black folks don't even know that Egypt is in Africa, all right? And this is due to the Hegoism, and one has to ask, why is this? The secret lies there. We have a rich repository of spiritual knowledge. African people, we as an African people have always been a very spiritual people. We can't start time with a Western time. We've got to go back. So this is to not to believe, but to think about, okay, the rich heritage that African people, okay, brought to the world that's incorporated into many of the ideas that we have today. And I think that we would open up a whole true spiritual consciousness, above all, starting to see our own divinity in opening to what our ancestors wrote for countless thousands of years. So this is the importance of understanding this. After all, when you look at the Biblical Archaeology Society in New York, they research in Egypt all the time. They do digs in Egypt all the time. So this is not revealed, okay, to the average person. It's in their own academic circles, their own round tables and discussions and so forth. So the average person, unfortunately, doesn't know these types of things. When I'm over there, I see all the different archaeological teams from France, Germany, England, digging all the time. Here we have the proof, we have the evidence. So for many years, I have lectured on this with visual documentation, bringing back for people not to believe, but to think about, okay, who we are as a people, but above all, to unlock, okay, that spiritual genius, okay, where someone can go and find that equally they can bring out a richness that's lying dormant in us. I'd never imagined that I would travel the world as a young man, okay? But of course, if I did not open up, I would not be bringing hundreds of Africans back to Africa on pilgrimages to see this great heritage of the Nile Valley, and those who have gone on to do bigger and better things that they were doing, okay? Because that's the empowerment of seeing oneself.
And really, and correct me if I'm wrong, you can't start to talk about world history from the Greek era.
Of course not.
Yeah,
unfortunately,
world history has to start from Africa, but somehow we look at Greek civilization, quote unquote Greek civilization, as the foundation of world history.
Right. Well, we have to ask why. Why is it that the Western world starts with the Greco-Roman world? The Western world starts with the Greco-Roman world because of the indoctrination into making think that nothing happened until the Western world came into being. And this is where a lot of people are locked into. Our educational system is locked into a Western academia. It's not dealing with ancient Kemet, ancient Egypt. If ancient Kemet, ancient Egypt as it's called today, if it was part of the educational system, okay, from our early age, we would develop a serious critical analytical analysis in understanding how these things that we see today, that black people, African people created these ideas, okay? Our children come home and they have to study Copernicus, they have to study Galileo, okay, Kepler, but imagine if they knew about the grandmasters like Imhotep. Now, the building is there that he built, the Step Pyramid in Saqqara, the world's first stone building. Here's an African who was a physician 2,000 years before Hippocrates, all right? Here's an African who knew the circulation of the blood long before the, what is called William Harvey, okay? And as well as the Roman Galen, he also knew, Imhotep also knew the anatomy of the body, as well as the circumference of the earth, the 25,000 miles circumference of the earth long before the Athenian Eratosthenes. This is powerful knowledge. so that would neutralize the power of Western Europe and Western civilization, as though everything was at a standstill until the Greco-Roman world came on the scene. And in fact, we are told that the world in Africa, is the negative connotations, savages, heathens, and all these kind of negative connotations that we relate to African people. And that's one of the powerful things in terms of going back and taking people right out of the group and seeing the audience actually gasp.
The negativity.
We'll see the audience, the group at gasp when I put them next to a relief over 3,000 or 4,000 years ago, and that black person from our group looks just like the one over 3,000 and 4,000 years ago. So showing the connection, that we're not trying to make something black. It is black. It is African. Okay, it is African people who created this, like that great colossal called Ra-Horum Akhet that most people know as the name the Sphinx by the Greek name, where Count Boney, a European who witnessed it, that Thomas Jefferson refused his book to be published in the United States because he said that this is an African colossal, this civilization created by African people. This colossal going back over 4,000 years ago that Napoleon saw fit to, blowing his nose off. So again, that is the power. This is the oldest colossal on the planet Earth. So you come into Egypt, this is the colossal that you see. This is what you look up at and you gasp at seeing it. So we have to look at everything else. And these presentations that I do are a series of presentations, okay, that I come out to have is Bobby Wright, a man named Bobby Wright, who actually wrote a book, and say peace be upon him because he's now an ancestor, who wrote a book called The Psychopathic Racial Personality. And he's talking about how the racism of Europeans to deny African history has developed Europeans into a stage of psychopaths. Okay, so a person, when you see the obvious is for what it is, the psychopath will do everything to deny what is. Okay, so in his book, he also pointed out that we've got to create communiversities. And communiversities are programs in the community that we come for people who are interested, who are not afraid to think for themselves and have critical analytical analysis. And having programs like this here in the communiversity, and honored to be back in Tortola again for Time is Time of Promotion, to have these programs. And so there are many different topics, and this one will be the African origin of Christianity, which I will deal with the reliefs, I will deal with the temples and tombs. This is not coming from my point of view, but looking at these monuments and temples and reliefs for 3,000 and 4,000 years ago, and do a comparative analysis with the pictorial art that we see in Western art, to see where ideas of Leonardo da Vinci, Raphael, and others, Europeans, okay, copied these ideas, incorporated into European art. So all we see are the Europeans in this art, but the spiritual ideas were created by African people thousands of years ago.
You know, we talk a lot about African culture, and of course, there is no culture without the spiritual aspect of the culture. I think that that sort of like emanates out into whatever activities the human being, that feels the need to rely on his divine self or a superior power. Certainly, that development comes out of that innate desire. And we always talk about African culture, but I don't get the sense that we understand when we talk about African culture what that really means. And for a long time now, I've been trying to say, saying to myself, I wish I had someone to say, well, in our spiritual beliefs, for example, in spirituality, what were those beliefs? What were the ritual practices? Now our ritual practices, of course, we go to church on Sunday, we sing to a Jesus Christ, who happens to be represented by a white figure hanging on a cross. Somebody doesn't look like us. And now we're beginning to realize that that's an inaccurate portrayal. So we pray in a certain way, we say certain prayers to this deity, and so on. And I'm wondering how different that is, what we are doing, how different what we are doing from what took place in our ancestral home.
Well, as I said before, Many things that we see around us today, if we understood the ancient African culture and spirituality of the Nile Valley, and specifically speaking of Egypt as we're speaking of now. And let me say that we say Egypt because we have the evidence, okay, when the early Greeks came in. The spiritual systems are throughout the African continent, named by various names, okay, whether it be the Yoruba, okay, and other spiritual systems. But Egypt clearly gives us the evidence where the Western civilization was built off of that, okay, and it's on the African continent. It's not in Europe, okay, it's on the African continent, northeastern part of the continent. Dealing with the various spiritual systems, how the culture, the prayers and so forth, and rituals and things that we see today in reference to the connection with the spiritual deity, or as we call God. That was a natural, innate part of the culture of Africa as well as the Kemetic Africans of the Nile Valley. Without it, we would not be doing what we're doing today. So when we look at the idea of going to church on Sunday and giving recognition to, as you said, the white Jesus, okay, does not represent your divinity. In ancient Africa, depending on what period it is, okay, was the name in connection with the god. Okay, for instance, let's start with the Middle Kingdom over 4,000 years ago. It's Amen. We know Amen very well, okay, but we don't realize that Amen came from Africa. We say Amen, we end our prayers with Amen, where the people give praise to Amen. They raise up their hands, okay, they had prayers, okay, giving praise to Amen. So it became the Salat in Islam, and ideas. They bowed down to Amen. We see ideas in Nehemiah in the Bible where one is calling Amen's name, Amen, Amen, and the people bow down their heads, okay, before Amen. This is the Amen that the Greeks took up out of the Western world. So it became the Amen that we say at the end of our prayers. If we were to go to Timothy chapter 6, verse 16, we are seeing Amen here, where it talks about the whole, where no man can see, okay, and he can't be seen. Amen represented the invisible spirit that's all around us, the invisible spirit that permeates through all the universe. So Amen ends in Timothy as well as other verses of the Bible, but we're looking at thousands of years here. So of course, when one sees it today and one has a belief system, then we're locked into just now. But if we have a spiritual consciousness, then to connect these things to our own ancestors who created them, then we were able to transcend time and space and go back and see how Alexander took Amen up out of Africa. It became part of the Greco-Roman world. It became part as names like Jupiter and Zeus, who's also represented as black, and became part as when Christianity came into being with the Byzantine Roman Christians, then they incorporate Amen into their prayers, and this is the evolution of it. So we see this whole rituals, okay, that took place. You see temples there where people gave praise and homage, okay, to the spiritual deity that we refer to as God today, or Amen, as you know they did. You know, so they had various services and so forth. If we see the rituals that we see in the Catholicism in the church, as well as the clothes that the Pope actually wears, are identical to the Karihebs. That's what they're called, the Kariheb priests of ancient Egypt. No one can deny it. I do these comparisons, okay, in my presentation. The very crown that the Pope wears, okay, goes all the way back to the spiritual deity of Asar, okay, wearing the crown, who's the judge in the afterlife. So again, we can find and follow many of these different rituals one after the other, even though one may go to church on Sunday and one would say, well, ancient Egypt was into sun worship. Well, one goes to church on Sunday and have sunrise service. If 3,000 years ago, would they say Christians were sun worshipers because they went to church on Sunday and have sunrise service? Okay. No, I mean, so the same thing with ancient Egypt. The sun represented the physical representation of the divine force of the universe. So as you refer to the European white Jesus, okay, which is a corruption, because after all, in Revelations, it says, my hair is like lamb's wool, and my feet is like brass as it's stuck in the oven. So clearly that's not the representation that we see with Michelangelo's image of the Jesus that we have gotten. In fact, prior to the slave trade, all the images and representations of Jesus was always shown as being black. We see that the Pope in the Vatican has a black Mary, a black Jesus, okay? This is the takeoff of the spiritual Madonna and Child of ancient Egypt. We see it throughout the Europe with the black Madonna and Child. And that came up out of ancient Egypt. That is the secret.
Okay. Now, I often wonder about ceremonies. and relationships in ancient Egypt. We here in the BVI and in the Caribbean and in the world as African people, we don't have such good relationships as far as I can tell. We don't have that unity. We don't have the
in relationships in terms of an African man and woman to being together.
African people, men,
African
men
people
and
in general,
men,
in general.
yeah, men and men, women, you know, children.
They're trying to make a relationship with men and women and women. Well, that's another topic.
That's a different topic. But we don't have the relationship. We don't have a good relationship with each other.
Right.
We don't have that trust. We don't have that unity.
Right, absolutely.
We don't have that support. We don't see ourselves as worthy for a lot of things that we have and a lot of things that we do.
Right.
Other people can come and they can have billions of dollars and we'll give them more billions of dollars. But if you give one of us some billions of dollars, there would be too much for us to have. I mean, that's the mentality I see. And I often wonder about what kind of relationships we had in ancient Kemet. With each other, you know, the men, the women, the children, the family structure. What was that? What was that like? Was it an important value?
Well, that was absolutely an important value. But again, well, first of all, you know, again, let me say on Spotlight here, this is the Communiversity, and these issues that we're bringing up is so important that we're talking about this and discussing this over the TV station. And we have to be clear on the fact that why is it that we have such a disunity? Why do we have a breakdown? Keep in mind that the process of the Ma'afa, okay, that's the Africans who were kidnapped from the African continent and brought over here to be made slaves. This is real history. The other thing that we have to look at is, you know, the process of making a slave. And then we have to look at neo-slavery, the process that is still going on in our mind and head, the conditioning. That condition of 400 years cannot be erased in a matter of 100 years, okay? When you take in consideration all that took place in the process of keeping Africans divided, okay, keeping Africans separated, keeping the African man and the African woman separated, okay, because that unity could bring up an uprising, okay, and the freedom of Africans on the slave plantation. So this was the tactic that was used by the slave master that has created this type of division that we have today. So we have to be clear on that and not try to code it with anything else but for what it is.
Yeah, but we don't believe it though. How do we get to believe that someone was able, or some group was able to change our minds, so to speak? Because it seems to
well,
be...
it's like a conqueror. It's like a conqueror. If someone has a bigger gun than you have or a bigger weapon than you had, I mean, Europeans came into Africa with cannons. Okay, Africa did not have cannons that could blow up villages. Okay, so you come in with come in on villages with cannons, and this is what created the whole process of putting one African group against the other African group for fear that if they didn't kidnap other Africans, that they would be kidnapped. So it was an ancient Kemetic word. It was the most vicious form of isfet, or evil, okay, that was perpetrated on African people to create this system of slavery. So this is what created that division. But in relationship to ancient Kemet, keep in mind that whole system was based off of a spirit of Ma'at, okay, and Ma'at was represented as balance. Okay, cosmic order, justice, truth, justice, and righteousness. This same symbol of Ma'at is the scales where the heart had to be weighed with the feather of Ma'at. That becomes the justice system of today. Generally seen as a European or a white female holding with the blind, what they call blind justice, with the scales in her hand. This comes from Ma'at, an ancient Kemet, that you see the scales of justice. Of course, if we don't study ourselves, we would not understand where this whole idea came from. So the whole society was judged by Ma'at. It was the idea of the king, okay, to make sure that he ruled with Ma'at, to make sure chaos, okay, and evil would not come in. So this is what created that balance. The other thing we have to look at is how they saw the spiritual dialectical laws of opposites. And what I mean by the spiritual dialectical laws of opposites, they had terms like Neter hedge. Neter hedge is divine husband. Neter hemp, divine wife. So they put divinity in their unity to go into eternity. And that's what I meant by the beginning of this program, that our divinity was taken away. So even in the relationships, divinity was put in called Neter Hedge and Neter Hemp. That's the husband and wife. So imagine if we understood and brought that spiritual unity of a Neter Hedge and Neter Hemp into our unity. So we have to understand that our breakdown is due through that we're still fighting through mentally, psychologically, the post-traumatic slave syndrome process that we're still going through. And as long as we recognize that and understand that, okay, and start to detect it, okay, when it comes up, when we start to interact with each other. It's a system that still works today, okay, for the benefit of those who do not have our best interests.
Economics. We got about 5 minutes remaining.
Wow, time goes so fast. Wow.
So fast, yeah. Economics. What kind of systems, governance systems, and economic systems? Do we have a collective system, the individual systems? Because right now, individuality is the order of the day. What was our feeling when it comes to the social, economic, political order?
Well, that's the Western world. You know, it works off of individualism and me, myself, and I. You know, and don't care about anyone else. And keep in mind that the system, Africa's system, has always been a social system, where it's working for the benefit of the all. And whether you look at the pyramids that are still there, okay, they were meant to represent eternity. It took a collective unity, okay, to put the pyramids together. And okay, now was there a paycheck, as we know today? Did you get a paycheck every day? No, it wasn't necessarily a paycheck, but you got what you needed, okay? You got the food, okay? You got, you know, all the things that you would need, okay, like going to the grocery store, okay? The essentials of life, okay? It wasn't the passing of currency, so to say. So you got your share of your currency and the wheat, okay, and the helping of the building some of the greatest structures on the planet Earth. So it was a collective unity in structuring these, you know, great monuments in the society of ancient Egypt.
What about our health and our nutrition, the foods we eat, the diet?
Absolutely, it was absolutely necessary. Now, keep in mind that we know that there are vegans, vegetarians today. I'm a, you know, pretty much 95% vegetarian. Still eat a little bit of fish. But the Karihe priests did not eat meat. They did not eat flesh. They did not eat pork. When we see Muslims who don't eat pork today, it's based off of the Kemetic system. We can't think the fact that this powerful civilization, okay, did not influence these other places, which it did. So we see it comes down to us today. So fasting, they fast, okay, they took care of their health. Now the common people, okay, they did not eat pork. Okay, pork was looked at as dirty. Okay, it was in fact looked at as a set. It would be equivalent to Satan or the devil, or, you know. So the pork was not something that was eaten. But they did eat beef and things of this nature, and fowl and things of that nature. But when one came into the priesthood and came into the temple, the purpose and objective was to be clean, okay, clean of mind, okay, to rise up your son and bunum, your supreme good. And that was done through, you know, living a clean life, okay, clean consciousness, okay, opening up the pineal gland, or the spiritual eye, the third eye that they saw in the anatomy of the brain. All these things were done, okay, so that was very important with the Karihe priests. Some of these things that we're going to touch on in the presentation, we're going to show the architecture, to follow the architecture, to show how the church, synagogue, and mosque gets its design from the ancient temples of Egypt, understanding what the spiritual idea of the Christ is all about, okay, where the early African Christian Gnostics are talked about that Christ was about a spiritual development. This is why the Romans exterminated many of the Gnostic Christians, because they understood that each and every one of us are our own spiritual Christ, to rise up that spirit within ourselves. But when we see that the making of what the Europeans have pretty much created the image and representation of what you were saying earlier, that we see all around and see in the church is the European image. So we've got caught into taking that spiritual Christ out of ourselves, that spiritual development, and putting it into a picture and representation of someone else, and looking to our divinity and our salvation in an image of something that doesn't look like us. So it's impossible for your spiritual development to develop in your spiritual Christ as those early African Gnostics. Okay, and just very quickly, the Gnostics were the conduit, so to say, of the Romans at that time, and pulling together the ancient spiritual knowledge of ancient Egypt that was already old, mind you, even during the time of the Romans. This was already ancient. But they saw that the Romans were corrupting this whole idea. It was not about a body, but about a metamorphosis, a spiritual metamorphosis that would take place, that the spiritual body would rise, the physical body would not rise. And the Gnostics were exterminated because the Romans had other objectives, and the other objectives for the deification of their own image, and that has been with us ever since. And these are some of the things we're going to be covering in the lecture at the Mellow Moods Restaurant. And we only come out for people, you know, to think about it and have a communiversity. And just like going to a university, you know, you do comparative analytical analysis to think.
This is just a little taste.
Just a little taste.
Just a little taste.
Right.
A little taste was going to happen tomorrow night at 8 p.m. at Mellow Moods Cafe. Egyptologist Ashra
I always like to say chematologist because Egyptologists associate with colonial period of Europeans coming.
Chematologist
Ashra
Kwesi is going to be there, and he's going to be talking about African spirituality, ancient Egyptian spirituality, and the origin of all religions. Actually,
Christianity. We'll touch on a lot of other things, right?
You know, all religions, but Christianity in particular, the principles.
We have a rich heritage.
Yeah, and certainly we look forward to seeing you tomorrow. And I'm really, really glad that you're back. It's sort of like a divine intervention to have you back at the end.
Well, it's always great coming to BVI at this time of the year when there's ice and snow up in the States, and you got an ice age going on up there. So
it's a great close off for African Descendant Story Month.
Great, great. Honored to be here again, my brother. Yes, sir.
Good to see you. Yes, Ashra Kwesi is going to be at Mellow Moods Cafe at 8 p.m. tomorrow night, Wednesday night, the 5th of March, and it's a free will offering of $10, and you can ask him questions about anything you want to ask him about. But he'll be talking about the African origins of Christianity, so make sure you don't miss it. Next week, the spotlight will shine on Dana Tysoon Burgess Modern Dance Company out of Washington, D.C. They'll be here at the HLSC Community College on March 15. I'll also be speaking with HLSCC lecturer Dana Lewis Ambrose. He just wrote a new book, Moving from Infancy to Young Adulthood, a contemporary view of the development of the Virgin Islands. That's a very important book. We learn a lot about where the BVI came from and where it's possibly heading. Spotlight, of course, is seen Tuesdays at 8 p.m. and rebroadcast Sundays at 2:30 p.m. on JTV Channel 55. You can catch up with all your Spotlight broadcasts on jtvlive.net. You can email me at jtvspotlight@yahoo.com. Thanks for your words of encouragement, your suggestions, and your criticisms. I'm Ed Juenka, reminding you that when the spotlight is on, you see the facts. Please, peace and blessings.
Spotlight is brought to you by Tortola Concrete Limited and H. Lavity Stout Community College.